Well, here's a troubling truth. Take a look. Satan wants to keep you captive to your fears. And that's precisely why Dr. David Jeremiah is taking them on in his new book. And I've looked forward to, well, every chapter. Chapter 5, Disconnection. The fear of disconnection, of being alone. Dr. David, this is a real deal. America has an epidemic of loneliness.
And it's, it's sort of a disconnect because everybody says we've never been more connected ever in history with all of the iPhones and the Twitters and the Facebook and all of this stuff. And yet, with all this electronic connection, personal connection is an all-time low. And there is a lot of study going on right now of what all of this is doing to us. We've become a very lonely generation.
Well, in this chapter, you introduced me to two new words, two new phobias. One of them, we're going to see on the screen right now. The name is a little unusual, autophobia. Nothing to do with cars.
No, it means to be afraid of being alone, to be afraid that you will be alone in any situation. People have that, and like a lot of the other phobias that people have, that's one.
22% of Americans ate dinner alone last night.
Right.
And maybe that's not distressing for everyone, but where does just loneliness cross over into a phobia?
Well, here's a good illustration of why this is such an issue. There's a story in this book about a man who had 700 friends in his Facebook, Twitter account, and he got to thinking about the fact that he didn't know any of them. So he decided to throw a party for all of his electronic friends, and he invited them all to a bar for whatever and said he would pay the bill. And he gave the time, and he dressed up in his best clothes, and he went to wait. And he waited, and he waited, and one lady showed up who wasn't even one of his friends, but was a friend of one of his friends. And he said, with all my electronic friends, I had no one I could really count on. That's where so many people are today in our culture. We're connected, but we're disconnected.
Americans spend 8 to 9 hours a day staring at some kind of glowing screen. But you say electronic communication has moved us away from authentic community.
Right.
That's the crying need.
And you know what? All of us who do what I do have discovered you can be in the midst of a crowd and still be very alone. If you ever go to one of the big cities of the world like Tokyo or some of those places, and you end up in the middle of this teeming multitudes of people, but you don't speak their language and you don't know anybody, it's the most lonely experience you will ever have in your life. But it's the experience many Americans are having today because they have disconnected from one another and connected into this electronic world. And some people think that's sufficient, but it's not.
It's kind of a multi-layered challenge. Someone who speaks as you do to crowds of people said in an authentic moment, she said, I've realized I want to be admired, but I don't want to be loved. There's someone who's grown comfortable with distance, with lack of connection. And yet God wired us for both vertical and horizontal relationship. And living room time.
That's right. And there's so many illustrations in the Bible about people who went through loneliness. I mean, I think about Noah, for instance, who preached for 120 years and only had 8 converts. It was his own family. He was rejected by everybody.
He could have felt like a loser.
He could have felt like a loser, and I'm sure that people just stayed away from him. They thought he was crazy, what he was saying. Go through the scripture and you'll find illustrations, and one of the most interesting ones, in my estimation, is the loneliness that the Apostle Paul felt toward the end of his career while he's in prison.
We're going to unpack this. I wish we could fix it, Dr. Jeremiah. I had a tribal chief from Malawi here in Canada, and she'd spent 3 weeks in America. You can imagine the kind of needs, desperate needs she's dealing with in her country. But all she could talk about was the lonely people that she had met in America in her time there. So many lonely people because we don't have real connection. And we're not sharing our lives.
And that's why in our churches, and a lot of pastors know that one of the things we've tried to do is to connect people in small groups, and we work hard at it. I want to tell you, it is hard. because number one, people are reluctant to do it.
They're busy too.
They're reluctant to do it. We've come up with new strategies to try to help young couples because both of them work. But without that connection, especially in a large church, people get lost. We have a little moniker that says, to grow big, you have to grow small. And if you don't, people get lost. Just as in the church, in the culture, you have to have somebody. You know, I remember a little story about a little boy who was afraid at night, and his mother came up and she said to him, "Honey, you don't need to be afraid. God is with you." He said, "I know, but I need somebody with skin on." He wanted something real. You know, God was not real to him apart from being in a person, and that's the way it is for a lot of folks today.
And did we give our key verse? What a wonderful promise. Joshua 1:9. And Joshua really needed this,
Yes,
didn't he?
he did.
Heading
Yes,
out
he
in
did.
Moses' shoes.
Right.
Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
Amen.
We're not finished with loneliness. Dr. David Jeremiah back again this half hour. Stay with us.